Welcome to Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in Los Angeles. I'm glad that Jerome Horton is back. He is a member of the California Board of Equalization. It's the only elected tax board in the country. And recently in Sacramento, we've seen very significant reform efforts make their way through the legislature, head to the governor, essentially stripping a significant amount of power from the BOE, taking away the right to hear tax appeals, sending certain programs to a different department. What's your sense of this?
Well, Brad, as you know, the Board of Equalization is the only elected tax represented agency in the nation.
Right.
Californians years ago took the position of the basic founding fathers and no taxation without representation,
right.
to make sure that the voters had a representative they could hold accountable in the taxation process. Well, during those years, there have been others who believe that those decisions should be made by individuals who are staff individuals. So what the legislation does, and it didn't go through the process, it actually went through a brand new process.
It was last minute budgetary, snuck in a budget bill. Yeah.
But it is what it is. It's a new process and it works. And so what it does is it establishes takes one agency and splits it into three. And so now you'll have a taxing agency that does the audits and collection activities. And then it creates an appeal agency that is headed up by a director that's appointed by the governor. And that director will appoint 9 tax lawyers or lawyers that will be referred to as administrative law judges, but basically staff, the civil service staff that will hear the disputes between the taxpayer and the taxing agency. So you have a tax agency hearing the disputes between another tax agency and the taxpayers. According to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, they've said that this process, it favors the agency. It doesn't favor the taxpayers. Taxpayers are going to have a real challenge, especially given that in the measure it establishes the Administrative Appeals Act as part of the policy.
Right. And I guess the BOE will keep its elected members. You will continue to have control over certain property tax matters. That's in the Constitution. But I do want to talk about the whole issue of taxpayers and interfacing with the agencies and authorities. I mean, I've told you the story. God, it was 25 years ago. I lived in Colorado for 11 months and 2 weeks, and I lived in Los Angeles for 2 weeks. And 3 years and 10 months after I moved back, I get this notice that California is trying to collect more taxes because somehow they were applying my taxes in a way that didn't seem appropriate, given how long I lived in California, which was 2 weeks. I contacted my BOE member, who was then Brad Sherman at Talago, and I said, what can I do? And it was resolved.
Yeah.
Can I do that now? I mean,
you can't. I mean, one of the greatest fears every individual has is I'm from the Internal Revenue and I'm here to help you.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And when you run into those challenges, they're not all the time, but when you run into those challenges, you want to have someone that's accountable to you, at least hear your case. And that's part of the challenge. I mean, the agency does a fabulous job, and quite frankly, nothing's really changed, even though they propose that it is. But the appeals process is very, very challenging.
Right.
It replaced 5 elected officials with 9 bureaucrats, for the most part, to oversee the appeals process. And somehow it's supposed to be better. But mathematically, you got 5 versus 9 more people doing the same job.
So the question becomes, is this set in stone? We've heard about threats of litigation as we speak. I don't know if anything's been filed, but do you believe that there is a case that this was not done properly, it's not constitutional? Have you looked at it yet? I may be jumping the gun a bit.
Well, Brad, as a former legislator, I respect the legislative process. The legislature has spoken from my perspective. It is law, and I'm going to do everything I can to implement it.
I understand.
Even though I still think it's unfair, but that's my duty, is to implement it and then advocate for the things I don't believe in. There are those who have said that it violates a number of aspects of constitutional law. It's an urgency clause because its implementation is July 1st, which has an urgency, and typically urgency clause requires a supermajority vote in order to pass out. There are other matters that I've heard, but for me, it is law, and I intend to, I don't want to mislead folks to think I'm not going to implement it. I intend to implement it. But at the same time, I intend to continue to advocate for taxpayers. They're going to need advocacy more than ever before. According to every study out there, the Administrative Appeals Act is very, very complicated.
Right.
And you're going to need a lawyer. You're going to need a staff of lawyers in order to defend yourself in a tax matter. And so you no longer have that advocate in place. But, we have to be hopeful that, the studies that says that it typically is difficult for a taxpayer to win in this environment, this system, let's be hopeful that, we can get it fixed. We can make amendments to try to fix it.
I appreciate your optimism. I want to talk about another program, the Earned Income Tax Credit Program. California recently passed its own Earned Income Tax Credit. The federal government has an Earned Income Tax Credit. This Cal EITC was extended. What do you make of the EITC program? Will the BOE still be looking at that?
Well, one of the arguments is that the Board of Equalization has no nexus with that.
Right.
In fact, the Board of Equalization oversees sales tax, income tax, use tax, property tax, every tax on the tax return. 26% of those who file are actually business, which is unique about what the legislature did this time. They basically added another $1.1 million in order to cover individuals who are sole practitioners who have their own business, acknowledging that businesses who file with the Board of Equalization are filing their tax returns.
Of course.
And they set aside $2 million for outreach. The inherent problem with that is that we're still losing $1.8 billion in federal funds.
Explain why. Why are we losing that?
We're losing $1.8 billion because there isn't an organized system to properly educate the taxpayers. The volunteers aren't trained on California tax law, so the volunteers who are preparing tax returns for free, they're not trained on California tax law. And so they don't necessarily deal with the use tax and the sales tax and the income tax that is not in conformity with federal law.
I see. So there's money being left on the table. The federal government has credits that people aren't claiming.
$1.8 billion. And there's a simple solution. It's to require all of the state agencies that are spending millions of dollars, spending millions of dollars to collaborate, to work together.
Will the BOE have that opportunity in the future?
Well, we've done it. I mean, our office had collaboration, First Franchise Tax Board, Internal Revenue, and every university in the area, community colleges, high schools, where we recruit volunteers through the community college, we train them. And what we found, Brad, is that, we were able to do 12.9 thousand tax returns, recapture $13 million for federal funds, but we saw a decrease in the earned income tax federal credits of about $1 million because of the lack of coordination. Because this past year, all the funding for coordination is going out.
Right.
So the money is there. We're spending the money. It's going into various different pots when it should be consolidated and spent wisely so that we get the economy of scale of working together.
Can that happen?
Well, Brad, government working together?
His name is Jerome Horton. He is a member of the California Board of Equalization. He represents almost 10 million people in Southern California. My name is Brad Pomerance. We're in Los Angeles today. I'm so glad you're joining us on Local Edition.